Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Let's Discuss Cafe. I'm your host Avinash, and today we have got a guest who can draft contracts faster than you can say force majeure. She's the legal dynamo behind the scenes, the queen of compliance, and the undisputed champion of due diligence. So, drumroll please. Her name is Rukmani Sinha. So, Rukmani, thanks a lot for joining us on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me on the podcast.
Awesome. So let me start by asking your professional story from studying at the Law College Dehradun to becoming a legal counsel at Piramal Finance.
If I sum it up, it's a journey of almost 2008. I got into the college, so it's 24, so around 16, 17 years. It's been a wonderful journey, not just in terms of learning, but also in terms of my professional and personal growth. I always wanted to get into the field of law and administration. Although I was a science student, my father always wanted me to be an engineer, but to his disappointment, I became a lawyer. And
My dad also wanted me to be an engineer.
yes. And unfortunately, all of us, like all three of us, my siblings, none of us are engineers, being in a steel city since our childhood. So we are all in a profession which is off the track in those days. Suddenly, I feel I'm very old, but yes, in those days. So after 12th, I think I have done really well in my career in terms of academics, in terms of my professional space, in terms of learning, in terms of experiencing various aspects and nuances of being in the legal profession. Because I started my career as a human rights lawyer, and then I moved on to corporate field, where in the corporate space, I worked in different sectors. Initially in general contracts for a telecom company, and then I moved on to defense equipment and defense manufacturing company. Slowly and steadily, as and when I moved, I realized that I can do more than what I think about myself. Also, that I was very fortunate to undertake this profession because it is a very interesting, lucrative, of course, but it is a very interesting profession. It gives you an ample space and opportunity to grow, to experiment, and to sustain at the same time. So that's been my journey, and I think I'm enjoying it thoroughly. I feel very proud to say that I'm a lawyer, and I think I've almost tried to take the flavor of this profession in various, aspects. I've been in a litigation kind of a role. I have been in an academic kind of a role where for a very short period of time, I was associated with a college where I was teaching the students of 4th year and 5th year of law college. Then I have been associated in the corporate world where I have learned not just to grow within the department, but also work in a multidisciplinary kind of a setup. So yes, it's been quite a journey, and I think it's been a great journey so far.
Wow. Thanks for sharing that story. But what, in your opinion, was the most pivotal moment in this?
I think the most pivotal moment, also because it was my first job, so I was very enthusiastic about it. But I think the most highlighting or striking journey, or the portion of my journey of this professional base, was my stint with Justice and Care as a human rights lawyer, where I not only got the thrill and the compassion and the satisfaction of being a lawyer, but at the same time, it gave me a satisfaction because I was very directly interacting with human emotions, and I was dealing with something wherein I was contributing something to the society. So it was an organization which worked against human trafficking, and they had two motives, which was breaking the cycle of crime and saving lives. We not only had the idea of rescuing the victims or survivors of human trafficking, but at the same time, giving them a proper representation in the court, and also ensuring that eventually they become a part of the mainstream of the society. So the entire through and through process, end-to-end strategy, and my involvement in the strategy as a lawyer and sometimes also as a human being, it was phenomenal. And I think that has been the most striking, most satisfying, and most liberating portion of my career.
Any memorable case from your time at Justice and Care?
I think there are lots, but I would like to share one, or rather, I take the privilege of sharing two cases. We had got a referral case in Rajasthan where the survivors were already rescued by the police, and the survivors were not Indian national. Cross-border trafficking had happened, and they were brought to Jaipur. And when they were brought to Jaipur, they were 9 years and 11 years, respectively. So they came here under the guise of getting a job, but they were pushed into this commercial sexual exploitation business. And we got a referral through one of the arms or the agencies of UNICEF. And we went there, we studied the case, we met the girls in the shelter home. We understood the fact, but we realized that in the case, it was pending in the district and sessions judge court because it was a case related to minors. So it was a POCSO case. So the case was pending at the stage of investigation for almost 2.5 years. So the girls were not allowed to go home because of the reason that they had to testify in the court. And since it was a POCSO court, the legislature has very clearly given a guideline that if it's a POCSO case, then a certain time frame has to be maintained in order to complete the investigation and the evidence recording of the victims. So that was not being taken care of because of kind of hostility and retaliation from the defense counsels. And the PP could do only as much because he had multiple cases, and honestly, on a humanitarian level and also on a professional level, he could not be that much invested in each and every case. But still, he was a very genuine public prosecutor. So we went there and I filed a petition in the Sessions Court for a speedy trial. And in a span of 6 to 8 months, the evidence was completed. And those small girls, they kept on asking me, Didi, will we be able to go for our festival this time? Because they had been missing their festivals every year for past 2-3 years. So I told them that I'm trying my best and have faith on me, but just be very confident of how you perform in the court. They were brilliant and they testified very brilliantly, laying down all the facts of the case as in how it happened to them. And after that, with proper respect and dignity, they were repatriated back to their country. And later on, we figured out that we got a conviction in that case. But unfortunately, because of certain health reasons, I was not present at the time when they were being repatriated. So, they went to their country and we had our colleagues working in that country. And it was a very overwhelming moment for me when I got a call from my colleague saying that these girls were informing me that Didi ki tabiyat theek nahi thi, Didi isliye nahi aa pai, warna Didi bhi hame chhodne aati. I mean, that kind of gave me a satisfaction, not just as a lawyer, but also as a human being and also as a woman. So that was one great experience or memory I have from that case. And a similar kind of case was for a victim where we had a very strong language barrier because the victim was not from India again. We got this referral through the ministry and we had to make sure that the evidence happens in a time-bound manner and she can go back to her country. She was a major, so the criticalities and the legal implications with respect to a minor being trafficked through the borders or a major being trafficked through the borders are different. So she did not even have her passport and visa. So in order to complete that process, her testification was an important step. So I still remember both of us didn't understand the language that we spoke, but we did understand the feeling behind it. And I was with the survivor in an in-camera proceeding for almost 7 hours in the court. And that day, after the evidence was completed, when the judge pronounced that she can go back to her country, and he passed an order to that effect, I think that was something which was interpreted to her and by the interpreter or the translator. And she just came and hugged me and she started crying. So I think even that was very beautiful because even if language or the country or border is a barrier, but if it's a connect of human to human, that's a very satisfying thing. So yes, of course, these two incidences.
Wow. Thanks for sharing that story with our listeners. It was really inspiring. A lot of listeners we have are from non-legal background. So just can you give us a 2-minute brief of what is the POSCO Act? What are the main highlights of it? And what is like the general procedure followed there?
Okay, I would give this explanation in a very layman kind of explanation. So POCSO is an acronym which is used for Prevention of Children Against Sexual Offences Act. This was formulated by the government to create a sort of penal provisions and have a kind of a preventive mechanism where minors are children under the age of 18, who are sexually exploited by the perpetrators in various means and forms. It includes not just the act of having a sexual intercourse with the child, but also incidences like showing pornography, penetrative sexual assault, aggravated penetrative sexual assault, even something which a child, considers very unwelcoming. The second striking feature about this case is that not a lot of intricacies with respect to evidence and witness testification is involved, because there are umpteen cases by Supreme Court and a lot of introspection by the legislature and judiciary that a child's narration to the case should be of the prime importance, utmost importance. Third striking feature about this particular law is that the victim's interests are kept into consideration. So there is a provision of in-camera proceeding. There are provisions for victim compensation schemes which are attached to POCSO. And secondly, it's a gender neutral legislation. So even boys under the age of 18 years who are sexually exploited or exploited as per this act are also protected under this act. And the computation of the punishment is also properly given under this law. So that's what it is.
Thanks for that great explanation there. So what is an in-camera proceeding?
So in-camera proceeding is a process where the witness is asked to testify or narrate the incidences that has happened with the witness in a closed room, meaning thereby that it is only the judge, it is only the prosecutor, public prosecutor, it is only the defense counsel who are allowed within the courtroom. And secondly, there is also a provision of the victim or the survivor or the testifier sitting in a separate room where you have the audio-visual provisions, and the victim or the survivor testifying can see the accused, but the accused cannot see the victim, because it was so observed that when this actually happened in a court, the victims being minors majorly and were sort of intimidated by these accused or apprehended people and the lawyers of the apprehended people. So in order to ensure that they're not intimidated, they don't turn hostile, and the essence and the integrity of the statement given by the survivors is maintained, provision for in-camera proceeding was brought in place. And it was to safeguard the interests of the witnesses. So that is what is in-camera proceeding.
So after the amazing work Justice and Care has been doing and you being part of it, you moved on to Thomson and Reuters. How that transition happened and what was the intention?
My transition from Justice and Care to Thomson Reuters, and I would say also from Delhi to Bombay, was because I was also growing in my personal space. So it was after my marriage in 2017 that I shifted to Bombay. And Bombay, being the commercial capital of the country, although I had an option of continuing with the similar kind of a career, but I consciously and on my own willingness, I undertook this challenge, because I always thought that corporate world is not meant for me, because I do not have a knack for commerce or things related to numbers. So I thought maybe I can take it up as a challenge, and also it would give me a kind of a head start towards progressing in commercial space and in the commercial capital of India. So yeah, that was it.
So how was the difference in the work environment where you're working with humans and here you're working with just documents? And in one case, you could see the direct impact of the work you were doing, right? You could see that in a human life. But that won't be the case with your work in Thomson and Reuters.
So I tell you, there are differences, but there is also a similarity. In one profession, I was actually, as you said, that I was having a direct interface with human lives and emotions. But in order to sustain those human lives and emotions, what you need is the resource. And I think that is a kind of similarity, or rather a second step of achieving that, where the commercial world or the corporate world comes into picture. So I was definitely not having a direct interjection with the human lives, but of course, the means required for the survivability and the sustenance of human lives is money. And how to safeguard that interest for different companies, different parties or individuals, or can be addressed only through commercial space or corporate world. So that is how I convinced myself, that is how I explained it to myself, and that kind of gave me a continuity of my profession, I would say.
Okay. So we will go into the detail of the kind of work you did at Thomson and Reuters a little later. But I'm really interested in understanding that transition from Thomson Reuters to assistant manager legal at L&T Defense, because I know a lot of people who are working with companies like Thomson and Reuters and want to make this transition. So what should those guys be doing?
So when I was working with Thomson Reuters, it was Thomson Reuters and LPO, so to say, which is a
Yeah.
legal process outsourcing. But by the time I was leaving, I think it was already acquired by Ernst& Young. But the role that I was doing at L&T Defense as an assistant manager legal, as you said, it was also into general corporate practice. And the role that I was required to perform or I was performing in Thomson Reuters was also related to general corporate practice. So if somebody is wishing to take a transition from an LPO or similar kind of organization and get into the hardcore in-house role, there are certain basic laws, regulations, or practices wherein you need to achieve some level of excellence. And general contracts being one of them. Since I had a fair knowledge of general contracts, I would say, and that sort of helped me in creating a space for myself in L&T Defense. And I think networking and always being a part of such kind of discussions, meetings, or gatherings, it also helps because a lot of time, being a lawyer, you cannot be a know-it-all. So how do we keep pace with how other industries are developing and coming to pace is by networking or talking to different kind of people. So I think that these 2-3 things actually helped me to take a transition from Thomson Reuters to L&T Defense. And also sometimes you have to prioritize whether you actually want an exposure and versatility in your profile or you're actually looking for a good package. So I think that prioritization is also very important.
So what happened in your case? How did you learn about the job at L&T Defense and how did you make that switch? How was the interview? What kind of questions they were asking?
At L&T Defense, I think I was referred through some senior person who was known to my husband through some common connection. I'm still not sure about it. But the kind of questions that they asked me were, as I told you, very much centered around the basic corporate practices and basic contractual laws. And even at the time when I was with Justice and Care, I had a habit of reading case laws, recent judgments, how the court is interpreting different aspects in general understanding, not with a specific subject matter, of course. So that kind of helped me in order to keep pace with what is happening, how the law is developing and being interpreted. Then there were concepts like what kinds of contracts are there, what is indemnity, what is liquidated damages, and how can we ensure a specific performance of a contract. Basically, you should know that if you're stepping into an industry, what are the kind of legal regulations and guidelines that will be attracted to that industry. But the basic premise is, of course, the contractual law. Because whether you are an in-house counsel or you are working in a law firm, you have to see how you're able to contract, what are the basic principles, and then it gives you a kind of understanding for the specific legislations to cater to that business. So yeah, that's how it is.
So you brought in the concepts of contracts. So people who are currently working in LPOs, they get different type of works. One is litigation support, document review, and then there is contract abstraction work. So somebody who is planning to make this switch from an LPO to a corporate department, should try to get more contract work. Would that be your advice?
Rather than more contract work, I would say that variety of contract work. Because contract is something which is now not just, limited to the Indian jurisdiction. There are companies like my stint with L&T Defense, where we were required to negotiate contracts with an international party also. So at that point in time, there were certain international concepts or concepts which were internationally recognized and accepted by various countries that came into picture. So at that point in time, you need to know how and by giving what kind of legal logic, you're going to safeguard the interest of the organization. So effectively, if anybody working in an LPO, whether it is in documentation support or litigation support or abstraction support, I think one should never deviate from the focus of understanding the basic nuances of a contract. So that can sort of help them to develop and progress further.
Wow. So let's go into this a little deeper. Could you walk us through the process of drafting and managing complex financial agreements, such as software license agreements and NDAs?
I would first start with NDAs because it is considered to be a very trivial document. And we have seen that because of a lot of talks and jurisprudence on data protection and things like that, we are becoming more concerned and we want to safeguard those interests through NDAs. And it is considered that it is the most preliminary document when two parties are entering into a contractual discussion or sort of a business engagement. But I would have a different opinion, and I would like to say what I've learned, that although it is the preliminary document or the most basic document, but it lays down a wide variety of entitlements, rights, and it also gives us a threshold of how much risk we can take. So whenever we are negotiating our NDAs, we have to be very careful. We have to have a very clear understanding as to who is disclosing the information, what kind of information is being disclosed, and what are the measures, mechanisms of safeguarding that confidential information. I mean, I would suggest that one should not treat the NDAs with a sense of triviality, but they should consider it as an equally important document as any other document which comes subsequently in the discussion. Now, moving on to the software agreements that you said, I have been taught by one of my seniors in one of the organizations, and I shall be thankful to him forever for teaching me this. But before getting into any kind of a contract, one should understand the product and services with as much clarity as that of a salesperson or the product person. Because if, as a lawyer, we are not able to understand the product or the intricacies of the product or the nuances of the product, we will not be able to justify the language in the document. So it is very important that first step should be to understand the product or the line of business or the service that we are envisaging to undertake under that agreement. And thereafter, prepare a skeleton, or what we also call as a term sheet, as to what kind of clauses we would want to have in this agreement. And then slowly and steadily building on that term sheet, wherein we can put different kind of nuances. So, for example, in software agreements or IT agreements, aspect of confidential information plus intellectual property is very important. So we'll have to understand what kind of intellectual property is being brought to the table. What kind of license are we taking? Is it a SaaS model? Is it a PaaS model? Or is it just a build to print? Is it a build to spec? Or it's just a bought out item? Or is it commercially off the shelf item? So we'll have to understand that from the business team and the product team. And accordingly, we'll have to slowly and steadily build on the agreement. But sometimes we do not have that benefit of time. So in that case, we can have certain clauses or samples handy with us, which can, in any kind of arrangement, safeguard the interest of the organization. And also, as a business enabling function, our job should not just to be highlighting the risks in the contract, but also trying to find out effective legal measures of mitigating them.
Wow, thanks for that explanation. Now is the rapid fire time. The first question is, if you could be any color, what would that color be and why?
Blue, because it signifies peace and flow.
Great answer there. The next question is, if any animal could be a corporate lawyer, which species would best suit this role?
I think tortoise.
Okay. And why is that?
Slow and steady wins the race. You have to be slow, you have to be steady, but at the same time, you have to be very mindful and observant of what is happening around you. So, and only speak when you're required. So, that's it.
I think you are perpetuating the stereotype that
No.
you have about corporate lawyers. Okay, moving on to the next question. What's the funniest thing you have ever heard or happened to you in your legal career?
Funniest thing that has happened to me in my legal career is that while I was on a negotiation with another party, the other lawyer was not knowing as to I am from the legal background. He was telling me that, listen, I'm a lawyer and I'm telling you this. So that was very funny initially, but we got to know then it was a funny conversation. So I think, yeah, that was funny.
Good one. So, as we are running out of time, I have time for one more question. We noticed that you have posted a lot of content on hard facts of life or enlightening insights. How do these reflections contribute to your personal and professional growth?
See, since my childhood, I have been very motivated, and I mean, it has always inspired me reading quotations, books, writing quotations, reading some kind of books on spirituality or human behavior or, different aspects and things related to it. So whenever I come across any such good thought or anything which has been shared by anyone, which is very thought-provoking, and I really appreciate that, then I think it should be my duty to propagate that to like-minded people. So, yeah.
Wow. Thanks for sharing that. And thanks for coming on this podcast. It was really entertaining and enlightening as well.
Thank you so much for having me and giving me this opportunity. I really feel honored. And I hope whatever I spoke would be of some benefit, or it would be good for people to listen to, and looking forward for any further association in any way possible to anybody. And thank you once again for having me, and thank you.
It was completely our pleasure. And there you have it. Dear listeners, our legal adventure with Rukmani Sinha has come to an end. Thank you for tuning in to Let's Discuss Cafe. This is your host signing off. Also, don't forget to subscribe, comment your thoughts and share within your community. हमें भी popular होना है यार. Until next time, stay curious, stay caffeinated.